Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, help me stand. I am tired, I am weak, and I am worn. Through the storm, through the night, lead me on to the...
Hello everyone, welcome to Love Them Both. This is a talk show and a documentary show on the social problems of our nation, of our world, and of our times, the great social upheavals that are going on, and their moral and spiritual solutions. I say that because our problems, what's causing our problems is our moral and spiritual in nature. And the fact that so many people are not recognizing the morality and truth of God's law and the spiritual involvement is why we can't solve them. But so that's the nature of this show. We're aiming at the moral and spiritual, to teach the moral and spiritual solutions to the problems of our world. You'll see should see three during the show from time to time, three messages at the bottom of the show, a screen. One is a pregnancy helpline. If you're pregnant and scared, you can get free counseling, in contact with a free and confidential counselor there from anywhere near you, anywhere in the country. We'll also have an adult. They also contain counseling for people suffering the guilt of past abortions and information about adoption, the parenting option, which is a parenting option. We also have a hotline on the phone, bottom of the screen. You'll see from time to time for trafficking. Trafficking is a big modern form of slavery in our country, and there's a trafficking hotline there that's confidential. For example, by definition, underage girls in prostitution are being trafficked by definition. They're too young to make a choice to do that. And you can call the hotline and get information there from how you can proceed with the information you have. And I'm introducing a new hotline today, a new lower third today, about organ donations. It's and this one says, say no to say no on your driver's license to being an organ donor. When you go out to renew your license or get a license, one of the questions they'll ask you is, do you want to be an organ donor? You should say no to that. And for a very good reason. Organ donors must be alive when their organs are removed. So you're signing up for something you don't understand all the implications of. To have organs removed while you're still alive is a terrible thing. And in that connection, I have here an article from People Concerned for the Unborn Child. I want to quote out of it about the Chinese. It says, we should speak out against China's killing of prisoners for their organs. LifeSide News was told that the Chinese government is harvesting organs from countless prisoners while they are still alive to supply its lucrative organ transplant industry. They have now developed a more advanced version of its long-standing practice of taking organs from prisoners. That is, and listen to this is very gross, they are paralyzing prisoners in order to extract their organs while they are still alive. Now, it doesn't go into detail how they paralyze them, whether they cut their spinal cord or how they do it, I don't know. But organs must be taken from a living person, and that includes people here in the United States on your driver's license. That's what I'm telling you. Organs, they found out early on in organ transplantation that organs from truly dead bodies get rejected by the recipient. So they invented the myth of brain death, which not detectable brain waves, that definition of death. However, you are still alive because your body's alive and they can get those organs. So say no to organ donation on your driver's license. You don't want to put yourself in the position of having your organs removed while you are alive. Terrible thing. Okay, let me introduce the show. I want to introduce the show. I want to introduce a book by Pastor Bill Owens and his wife, Dr. Deborah Owens, called A Dream Derailed. It's referring to Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, if you recall. And in that dream, he wanted to see black children be free to set goals and get an education, go out and seek a successful life. This dream has been derailed. And here we have a caricature on the cover of Martin Luther King. And this is obviously not happening. I mean, if you look at the inner city, the way the inner city youth are getting, growing up and getting in gangs, they're not fulfilling that dream. The dream has been derailed. Why? Pastor Owens is 80 years old, and he marched with Martin Luther King during the civil rights movement of the 1960s. In his 40 years of African American history, 400 years of African American history, African Americans have produced great leaders for America and made great contributions that they are not often given credit for. In terms of contributions, they've created some of America's best music, jazz, and the height of that is probably in Louis Armstrong. And Negro, what I refer to as the Negro spirituals, are some of America's greatest and best music produced by African Americans. They produced great leaders. There was Frederick Douglass during the abolitionist era. He was an escaped slave who fled to Massachusetts and became an orator, an abolitionist, a contemporary of Abraham Lincoln. He made a statement that still sticks with us today. I want to bring to your attention. He said at that time, people are wondering what should be done with the freed slaves. And he says, do nothing with them. This is more a matter for God or nature to deal with than to you, because you're dealing with them. Our white people dealing with them has been their undoing. Our doing with them has been their undoing. And that statement, I'm going to show you in several examples today, still remains to be a problem. Still remains to be true. Our doing with them has been their undoing. That's why the dream has been derailed, by the way. It was from 1865 to 1965. In 1865, the African Americans were freed as slaves. They were on their own. And generally, they were hard workers and had many strong families. They were proud of their families. I knew families like that in the 50s. They were hard workers. The American economy was built by slaves, on the backs of slaves, built by slave labor, in much the same way in the 20th century, the Industrial Revolution built the American economy. So they made great contributions to this country. Other great leaders were Harriet Tubman. She was an escaped slave who from Maryland, who went back into the South 13 times and freed some 70 slaves, including friends and relatives, and brought them north on the Underground Railroad. There was Booker T. Washington, founded and built Tuskegee University, Tuskegee Institute. And of course there's Martin Luther King, who whose work brought an end to slavery, or to segregation. The 1964 Civil Rights Act was passed as a result of his civil rights movement. And that act effectively ended segregation. So he was a great leader. I believe Martin Luther King was a Christian minister. The civil rights movement in the 1960s was a ministry of the Christian church. I believe he will be, in the kingdom of God, one of the great leaders, on a par with David. We have him now rightfully as a statue in the Washington Monument, by the Washington Monument and Lincoln Memorial, because he preached nonviolence and that all men are created equal, these spiritual truths. But this dream was derailed by Lyndon Baines Johnson's Great Society programs. And the way it happened, and you will read this is why I point out this book. This is chapter 7 of this book, How the Black Family Was Destroyed by the Great Society program. Lyndon Baines Johnson went out and hired 100,000 caseworkers and sent them into black homes and persuaded them to get all the women on welfare and dependent on welfare, supposedly to eliminate poverty, I assume. But it got them on welfare. They resisted for a while, but eventually they were persuaded when they said they should do it for their children. But this put the black man out of the home, out of the picture. They were now dependent on the government. The Democrats created a permanent underclass dependent on them. Still to this day, Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, in each in their successive administrations, worked to expand this dependency for the Democratic Party. But what's bad about taking the black man out of the home is that what do children do when there's no father? Who do they turn to? They turn to their peers for recognition, for love, and they form gangs, and they don't have the moral leadership of authority of an engaged father. And this is the source. This is the best explanation. This is the explanation for the intercenter violence and problems we're seeing today, and we don't know how to solve. The nuclear family has been destroyed in the inner city by this program. And incidentally, Black Lives Matters, that's one of their goals, is to eliminate the nuclear family. Well, that'll only make things worse. So, I repeat Frederick Douglass's quote from the abolitionist era when he was asking people, saying people are wondering what shall be done with the slaves if they are freed. And he says, do nothing with them. This is a matter more for God or for nature. You're doing with them, speaking to white society, your doing with them has been their undoing. And we see this monkeying of the white society with the black underclass causing problems down to this day. Okay. So now we can get to the main topic of this show. That was the introduction. The main topic of this show is about 20th century abortion, the profound effect it had on the 20th century. And the main source for this is going to be this book, Grand Illusions by George Grant. Wonderful, good book here. Grand Illusions refers to Grand Illusions, you'll see what it means as we go through the show. And also a second article here by his name, let me just make sure I get the credits right. Hitler made this article, got many details out of this. Hitler made eugenics famous, but he took it from the United States. And by Edwin Black, this appeared in the Sarasota Manatee Jewish News in October 2003. That's my other source. So, there were great cultural changes took place in the earliest 20th century that affected the entire century, affecting us till this day. We're trying to reverse them. The first changes were population movements. immigrations. First, after the Reconstruction ended, about 1875, African Americans migrated from the South throughout the U.S. Now, the average white Americans feared African Americans because they thought they threatened the survival of the white race. But this is not borne out by history. In the Old Testament times, we have the example of the black Hittite nation, which intermarried with the Assyrian nations in the Palestine area, and within 100 years, that the black skin color was gone. And so today we find white people like Beethoven, who have kinky hair. So they were not really a threat to the white race, but it was believed that they were. The response of white Americans to this, the average white Americans to this threat was prejudice and fear, prejudice, and racial segregation. Whites gave in to fear instead of turning to their conscience, their heart, and the Bible. They knew in their heart, and the Bible says in the Declaration, that all men are created in the image of God. Psalm 34 says that God fashioned the hearts of, God looks down from heaven above. He fashioned the hearts of all men alike, and he watches their doings. There's no difference in the heart of the different peoples of the earth. They have the same dreams, thoughts, and feelings and desires that you or I have. The scripture also says that Eve is the mother of all living. We're all descended from the same two parents, Adam and Eve, according to scripture. And in Acts 17, it says, God made of one blood all the nations on the earth. So this fear of white Americans that for segregation, racial segregation, was not based on truth. The Declaration of Independence recognizes that all men are equal. So white society, nevertheless, white society, average white people responded desperately out of a survival instinct. In the South, you had Jim Crow laws, the Ku Klux Klan in the South, but you had racial segregation and separate and inferior educations all over the nation. Lynchings of men, women, and children occurred in every state. That's one of the most pitiful things. I saw a picture of even a woman who had been lynched in a dress, saying, what could a woman in a dress do that deserved to be lynched? It's just heartbreaking. But God is the judge, and he will repay. Negroes nevertheless, as they migrated, in segregation, they couldn't migrate. They were not welcomed into the white areas of the other states. So they tended to form self-sufficient communities on what we might call the other side of the tracks in every region these communities were often attracted by white mobs. There was a lot of racial fear and hatred during that era. For example, there was a prosperous Greenwood section of North Tulsa, Oklahoma, known as the Black Wall Street. In 1920, a mob burned to the ground the 30-square block area of Greenwood, enslaved 300 African Americans. Typical race riots that happened by average whites during that era. Tulsa has never recovered. Greenwood has never recovered. Northern Tulsa still looks like today, which was once prosperous as Greenwood, still looks like, I am told, Detroit. Okay, well, that was due to the movement of African Americans out of the South to the rest of the country. The second population shift was in the early 20th century. We had Ellis Island, massive immigration from Southern Europe, Southeastern Europe, even Asia to the American cities. This contributed to social upheaval and stress, and even the prohibition problems in the 1920s. So we had two population strips. Now, what about those were average American reactions? What about the response of what we call the educated elites or the wealthies? Reeling from this massive immigration and conflict everywhere. The elites feared that inferior races, what they considered inferior races, and the poor would bankrupt society with massive welfare and crime. And here's the third shift that took place. We had but now we had a shift in religion. These elites grabbed onto several atheistic philosophies that were born during that time. It became big that time. So there has been here a shift in religion taking place in the earliest centuries, away from the nation under God in America, on which the Constitution, to atheism, basically, and let me explain that. Several atheistic pseudosciences appeared in the earliest 20th century: Marxism, fascism, Judaism. The writings of Thomas Malthus persuaded an entire generation of influential people, scientists, intellectuals, social reformers, that the world was facing an imminent crisis caused by unchecked human reproduction. Now, these were not Christian pseudosciences, philosophies. These were based on atheism. So we're seeing here, underlying this, is a change from the nation under God religion to the myth of atheism. And where did atheism come from? It came from Charles Darwin's myth of evolution. When I study things, I like to collect information over a period of time and try to get all the pieces of the puzzle. And that's what I'm doing here now. I'm taking you back to 1849, when Darwin wrote his myth of evolution. This is an underlying piece of the puzzle. Even though it wasn't written in the 20th century, it had a great influence on us since. So the great influence of Charles Darwin's myth of evolution in the 20th century. In 1849, Darwin wrote his myth of evolution that man evolved, there was no creator. Out went in came the atheism, and out went the nation under God philosophy. Darwin was a racist. The original title of his book on evolution was The Origin of Species. The original title was The Origin of Species and the Survival of the Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. And that subtitle was shortened. That title was shortened because it was politically incorrect, but it was there. He also wrote in the defense of, in The Descent of Man, that in the near future from his time, that the superior races, the favored races, the white races, would destroy the inferior races, so that the man would be separated farther from the apes and from the apes and the lower animals, according to the theory of evolution. Well, make a comment here that if Darwin was a racist, would you believe him? Well, why would you believe his theory? If he didn't have the judgment to not be a racist, why would you think he'd have good judgment to write a theory of evolution that there is no God, that the creation exists without a God? Think about that. In 1863, his cousin, Francis Galton, theorized that if, remember now they're working, evolution has come to be a proper growing idea here in 1863. Charles Galton, who was the cousin of Darwin, theorized that if we could improve the stock in the world, but if talented people married only talented people, they'd have measurably better offspring. This theory became good birth, as it's called, became known as eugenics. Eugenics, the word eugenics means good birth, as in Eugene, Oregon. Then they believed that the one thing that Darwin and eugenics had in common is they both believed that at the bottom of the evolutionary tree, both of them in their schemes, they had the Negroes and the Aborigines. were the closest human beings on the scale to apes. So they had this in common, Darwin and eugenics, evolution from the start. Okay, by the 20th century now, fast forward up to the beginning of the 20th century, Galton's ideas about good birth, about eugenics, began to arrive in the U.S. just at the time Mendel's laws of heredity were rediscovered. American eugenic advocates then believed that Mendel's laws of color governing the color, size, shape of peas, corn, and cattle could also govern the social and intellectual character of man. Well, that's quite a leap, but they did it. It was quite an assumption. It was a false assumption to make. That's one reason eugenics is false. But reeling from masses and immigration and race conflict everywhere, elitists, utopians, and so-called progressives combined their fears of race and class struggle with their desire into a theory to make a better world. Eugenics became the American racist pseudoscience determined to wipe out all human beings that were not white, blue-eyed, the Nordic types. And Hitler called these, this is the word Aryan is what Hitler used for the white, Nordic, Northern European types. Now, let's see here, did I miss something? So genocidal elites. Okay, now this eugenics theory of good birth and laws of heredity governing the social and intellectual character of man would be no more than parlor talk had it not been for the great financial support, massive financial support from corporations, the corporate philanthropies. The Carnegie Institution literally created the American eugenics movement by establishing a eugenics lab at Cold Springs Harbor in Long Island, which had the resources to stockpile millions of index cards to plot the removal of families, bloodlines, whole peoples through. And the way they wanted to do this, the way they set in motion, the tactics to do this were going to be sterilization, segregation, racial and marriage segregation, marriage restriction, and ultimately, as it reached down to the later 20th century, birth control and abortion would be part of this, as we shall see. So, as I said, eugenics would have been no more than parlor talk, except for the massive financial support from corporate elites that wanted to have the superior Nordic people and wipe out what they considered inferior races. But they needed an activist to do this. They were willing, they had the money, but they needed a political activist. And Margaret Sanger, the founder of the American Birth Control League, which later on became Planned Parenthood, the American Birth Control League. She was born in 1879, and that is who they settled on. Margaret Sanger was mesmerized by pseudoscience or racism, pseudoscientific racism, eugenics, that the solution to overpopulation was to assist evolution. Here, evolution comes into the picture. Atheism, God under God is out of the picture. By assist evolution by restricting the reproduction of what they considered inferior peoples or races of mankind. Now, they could do this in their theory because in atheism and evolution there is no God. But this contradicts what the American Declaration of Independence says and what the scriptural truth says too. Proverbs 14:31, in the time-tested scripture, he that oppresses the poor reproaches their maker, but he that honors God has mercy on the poor. So this is the proper way to deal with the poor and the needy, not to eliminate them. But this whole eugenics theory was morally in the wrong direction. Eugenicists espoused the whites, they were unashamedly espousing the white supremacy of Europeans. Their goal, like Hitler, was to purify the bloodlines and the stock of what Hitler called the Aryan race. Margaret and her Malthusian eugenicists she gathered around her were not partial. Like Hitler, every non-Aryan, red, yellow, and black and white person was noxious in their sight. They liked the Northern Europeans. Margaret Sanger was convinced that other races, she wrote that other races were like human weeds, a menace to civilization. She came to regard organized charity to ethnic minorities and the poor as encouraging proliferation of defectives and delinquents. Margaret wanted no masters and no God. She yearned for an end to Christian benevolence. But as I said, Christian benevolence earlier in Proverbs 14:31, that he that oppresses the poor reproaches their maker. The maker is God. But he that honors God has mercy on the poor. This is the proper way. God gave us the poor to develop our own charity and our own character in helping them. But so Margaret Sanger was completely on the wrong direction. Thus, Margaret Sanger founded the American Birth Control League to promote the eugenics policies to restrict production of what they called inferior races, Hispanics, Black, Asians, Southeastern Europeans, the poor, by prohibiting racial immigration, by segregation, and even internment camps for the unfit to prevent the marriage. Apparently they had some such camps in the United States. And then later this took the form of sterilization, became big in the United States for about 70 years. And then birth control abortion in the later part of the century, down to our day, we've still inherited these eugenics techniques, as we shall see, to prevent the reproduction of inferior races. Well, these things had a powerful impact on the 20th century. A feminist author, Germaine Greer, wrote that by the 1920s, the eugenic concepts were accepted by all shades of society, liberals, radicals, conservatives, and had free reign in the popular culture. Some 40 states passed laws like forced sterilization for so-called mental defectives or for uneducated, usually black women on welfare. Nazi concentration camps were believed to be inspired by their American eugenicists' eugenic asylums. I'm going to call now the control room for the genocidal clip in a minute about Theodore Roosevelt, but let me say that Theodore Roosevelt himself, president in the earlier centuries, and the Supreme Court of the United States were caught up in this era too. In 1982, Roosevelt appointed Oliver Wendell Holmes, who became famous or infamous. Holmes, in the 1927 Supreme Court case of the Virginia law that authorized the state of forced surgically sterilizations of certain so-called mental defectives without their consent, Oliver General Holmes made the infamous misstatement, for which he is still infamous, that 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. Could we see the Theodore Roosevelt segment of the genocidal elites clip from the control room?
In a 1913 letter to American Eugenics Society founder Charles Davenport, Roosevelt had stated that the country had no business allowing citizens of the wrong type to reproduce.
Was reinforced by statements like those of Democratic President Lyndon B. Johnson, who in June of 1965 stated that every $5 the government spent on population control was worth more than $100 invested in economic growth. Then, At the urging of Republican Congressman George Bush, Johnson became the first U.S. president to endorse federal funding for birth control.
At about this same time, the political leaders from both parties began to increase their demands that aid to the poor, whether abroad or within the United States, be tied to birth control. In 1965, former Republican President Dwight Eisenhower complained that the United States was spending money to slow the population growth of responsible families, while at the same time
I am still seeing the clip. Okay. That Teddy Roosevelt there, and I think we even caught some of Lyndon B. Johnson later, shows how influential this eugenics movement was in the 20th century. Funding for eugenics, for white supremacy, came from the American industrials, and it still does, as we said. Rockefeller, the Ford, Carnegie foundations. Rockefeller subsidies were involved in production of the Nazi zircon gas that killed the Jews in World War II. Today, they are still involved in eugenics, producing the abortion bill, RU 486, to target the poor minority communities like the blacks in Alabama. So, just because Margaret Sanger is gone, this stuff, that doesn't take away all of their legacy and all of their work. We're still dealing with it. Now, eugenics was not without its critics. In the early 20th century, the great Christian apologist G.K. Chesterton fired unrelenting attacks against the eugenicists for turning common decency and commendable deeds like Christian charity into what they called social crimes. Proverbs 14:31, he that oppresses the poor reproaches his maker, that's God. But he that honors God has mercy on the poor. This is the true way to deal with the poor. God gave us, I believe God gave us the poor and the needy people in our midst for us to develop the character and charity to help. Chesterton condemned that the eugenists were combining a hardness of heart with a sympathetic hardening of the mind. As I pointed out, they were making moral and philosophical and intellectual errors from the very beginnings of their philosophy. Eugenicists and Margaret Sanger said the poor should not be born, but that contradicts Proverbs 17:6. Whosoever mockers the poor reproaches his maker, and whoever is glad at calamities shall not go unpunished. Okay, Chesterton's and biblical truth, but Chesterton, biblical truth were drowned out. The American people simply followed their own race prejudices. Now, not everybody did this. The French in World War II, the French did not have the fear of the American black soldiers, the attitudes toward them that Americans had toward Negro soldiers. So they were just seen as people in France, as they were, the American black soldiers. Okay, now Sanger and the eugenicists applied derogatory language like the feeble to sway the masses, to turn people against African Americans, like feeble-minded, the unfit, the N-word. Elitists like Margaret Sanger, the Rockefeller and Carnegie foundations provided lies for the masses to fear and hate Negroes, rather than face the truth in their heart and conscience, that, as our Declaration itself says, all men are created equal. The intensity of this racial hatred is still seen, remnants of it are still seen in white people, and in these incidents where we see black police officers, or white police officers, particularly ruthless, overcome by their prejudice against black. That's a hand-me-down from this era. I'm not saying that America is a racist society today, but there are individuals who have yet to weed it all out. That's what this prejudice was like. Psalm 33, I quoted, from the place of his habitation, God looks down on the inhabitants of the earth. He fashioneth all looks down on the inhabitants of the earth. He fashioneth all their hearts alike, and he considers all their works. God fashioned the hearts of all men alike. And that's important because our heart is our essence. It's our most important, and we're all alike. It wasn't until the civil rights movement of the 1960s that Dr. King began to give truth to this negative picture of eugenics, advocating love and nonviolence, that all men are created equal. But despite generations deprived of education, African Americans produced, as I've said, some of the best American music, jazz, the Negro spirituals. American economy was built by African Americans on slavery. In much the same way in the 20th century, the Industrial Revolution comparable built the American economy in the 20th century. Let's see, we also had other contributions by blacks. I mentioned Booker T. Washington. He created Tuskegee Institute. He had George Washington Carver created out of the peanut agriculture of the South, and so forth. Okay. Can the control room show me how much where we are in the time clock? What is it? 20 minutes left. Okay, we'll go fast here. Thank you. Okay. All right, now here we come to the grand illusion. We're now approaching what I call the grand illusion in this eugenics movement. By this, Margaret Sanger began the American Birth Control League, which later became Planned Parenthood, to target non-Aryan minorities, and she also published the Birth Control Review, which became big in these circles in the 1930s and 40s. The American Birth Control League shared board members and articles with Nazi eugenicists. In 1933, the Birth Control Review published an article by Ernest Rudin, Hitler's director of eugenic sterilization and founder of the Nazi Society of Racial Hygiene. He praised and defended the Third Reich. Margaret Sanger praised and defended the Third Reich's racial programs. After the eugenics gave birth control and racial purity a bad name in the World War II Holocaust, Sanger changed, and here's the grand illusion, she changed birth control for minorities to the gentler, more individualized term of family planning. And the name American Birth Control League to Planned Parenthood, these gentler, more individualized, socialized names. This is the grand illusion. Because Joseph Stalin, Mussolini, Hitler, and Margaret Sanger, all born around 1900, responsible for killing more people in the history of the world. But Stalin, Mussolini, and Hitler were destroyed. They were recognized as evil and destroyed. But Margaret Sanger's transformation by the grand illusion took her under the radar. She changed the name American Birth Control League to Planned Parenthood, and it survives today and continues to kill more people than Hitler and Mussolini, Stalin combined. Okay, that's the grand illusion. Well, What about racism and birth control clinics? Sanger began placing birth control clinics. Sanger had a dream, really all along, of a birth control pill, even before it existed, that could be given to the poor, to the blacks, to the minorities, and cause them to limit their populations. She, in fact, was responsible for producing the birth control. Margaret Sanger began by placing birth control clinics in neighborhoods to limit reproduction. The first birth control limit opened in 1916 in an impoverished section of Brooklyn, New York, to target the immigrants from Southern Europe, the Slavs, the Latins, and the Jews. But as the American Birth Control League grew, it began to target other what they considered dysgenic races, including blacks, Hispanics, American Indians, Jews. They wasted no time in getting started, off to a fast start. In 1945, Margaret Sanger launched what was called the Negro Progress. She said, quote, "The mass of Negroes, particularly in the South, still breed carelessly and disastrously more than whites," she said. The project aimed to hire 3 or 4 black ministers with social service backgrounds and engaging personalities to travel to black enclaves through the South and propagandize for birth control. Later she wrote, "The successful approach to the Negro is through the religious appeal. We do not want people to get out, we don't want word to get out that we want to exterminate the Negro population, and the minister's the man who can straighten that out. The operation was an attempt to get blacks to cooperate through birth control in their own extermination. The Negro Project was quite successful in some respects. Its genocidal intentions were carefully camouflaged underneath social service rhetoric and organizational expertise, but like the Pied Piper of Hamelin, many blacks across the country began to fall in line, follow Planned Parenthood in line. Soon birth control clinics across the South were contributing contraceptives to blacks. They didn't have the birth control pill yet. I should correct myself. It was contraceptives at that point. Note that abortion was not legal at this time in 1939. And in the research by Life Dynamics International, May 21, which you can see online, legal abortion and illegal abortion. What am I saying here? Without legal abortion, birth control alone, contraceptives, did not limit the black population as Sanger had hoped. But one thing birth control does do, it promotes fornication, intercourse. When Roe versus Wade came in 1973, when abortion was legalized, this changed everything. Child sacrifice was now legal. Could I ask the control room to show the PSA, the final message of the unborn? Child sacrifice by Roe versus Wade was now legal. We're killing children as part of this effort.
You don't have to say anything. I know where I am and why I was brought here. I know that in the next few minutes, someone's going to call my mom's name and take us to the room where I will be killed. But while there's still time, I want to thank you for caring about me when no one else did. Even though you were not able to save me, you did the best you could. The only thing I ask is that you keep fighting for every baby and never stop believing that one day you will find the way to save them all. But now my time is up, so please pray for me. I'm trying to be brave. You know, I think I would have been a pretty good little boy.
Okay, folks. Now, with legal abortion, the destruction of the black population escalated. Can you show the PSA of the 8 Midwestern states?
Abortion is the #1 killer of African Americans. Abortion kills more blacks than all other deaths combined. Since 1973, more than 40 million unborn children have been legally killed in this country. Of those, more than 14 million of them were black. African American women make up only 13% of American women of childbearing age, yet 35% of all abortions are performed on black women. The abortion rate among black women is 3 times higher than that of white women. At this rate of abortion, our future looks dim. Join me. Take a stand against this devastating atrocity. Abortion kills. We must protect all of our children, no matter how small their bodies may be. I'm Day Gardner, Director of Black Americans for Life.
Email bal@nrlc.org.
51 minutes. We're running out of time fast, folks. If we omit the 3 minutes of the outros, we ought to be able to pick up 3 minutes there. So what happened was that, black abortions didn't stop. In some communities, we need an explanation quickly for this phenomenon. In many cities, some black abortions outstrip live births by as much as 3 to 1. Why? Well, in the 1970s, Planned Parenthood had expanded to the north and the west. The project was racial, not geographic. Same guidelines. The density of birth control clinics was closely related to the proportion of minorities. It began in the 1980s. Began to shift to school-based clinics. Planned Parenthood did. They targeted inner-city minority school neighborhoods with black birth control in comprehensive sex ed. Of more than 100 school-based clinics nationwide, not one has been substantially in an all-white school. None have been in suburban middle-class schools. In 1987, a group of black ministers, parents, and educators sued the Chicago Board of Education and charged that clinics not only violate the state laws against fornication, but they are discrimination against blacks, a pernicious effort to destroy the fabric of black family life among black parents and children to control the black population. Here we come again. Destroying the nuclear family in the inner city, and when you see that, this is where the crime comes from. The results have been disastrous, destroying the blacks' ability to socialize the young. We have no fathers, the youth crime gangs, drugs, and in most black communities today, abortions outstrip live births by as many as 3 to 1, and it's because of these school-based clinics. Planned Parenthood's school-based clinics in the inner cities. Parents in Minneapolis, in one school district, parents in Minneapolis, in one Planned Parenthood school districts with comprehensive section, it seemed like a good idea. Always the same girls were getting in trouble. After these clinics came in, and these now getting in trouble is everywhere. It's normal. The parent says, I get scared sometimes. It's like we opened this Pandora's box. Our daughter is given information as bad as the KKK and maybe worse, since it's slick and sophisticated. It's all dolled up with statistics and surveys. Can you show the PSA, control room, show the PSA on the KKK, please?
Country. The abortion industry at this point kills as many African American people every 4 days as the Klan killed in 150 years. And you can truly say the most dangerous place for an African American to be is in the womb of their African American mother.
56 minutes. Well, okay, we'll just go to the copyright in a minute, but let me see what I can do here. One of the reasons why legal abortion combined with birth control to cause this this explosion of on the black community eugenically was because when abortion was illegal, there were more whites that had abortions than blacks. Okay, but when it became legal, they were able to sell legal abortion, something legal now, to black people, to black women, as a means for having an abortion, to not have children they didn't want or whatever it is. But they were able to sell this legal means of genocide to the black community, to the African American community. When abortion became legal, things reversed. And they situated these legal abortion clinics in the poor black communities where they convenient, which we see them today. So I've tried to cover a lot of ground here. It's an interesting history. Studies show that as birth control becomes more accessible, unwanted pregnancies, as you make birth control in these schools accessible, supposedly under the name of comprehensive segregation, what actually happened is pregnancies of the schoolgirls increase. Demand for abortion, legal abortion increase. Remember, birth control then is the devil's tool to promote fornication, and it's being found in your schools with comprehensive sex education. I'll close with blacks compose statistically. Health Human Services figures show blacks can close about 11% of the population, but they account for up to 43% of the abortions. Hispanics can close 8% of the abortions. They account for, of the population, they account for 11% of the abortions. So the effect of legal abortion has been a eugenic windfall for Planned Parenthood. That's why it has skyrocketed among blacks proportionally, and with that, it's against their population. It was intended to to limit or destroy the black population, and when they buy into it, they're going along with the eugenics program. So with that, I'll close. Keep watching. We'll plan to make more shows, Lord willing.
Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, help me stand. I am tired, I am weak, and I am worn. Through the storm, through the night, lead me on to the light. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home. Hear my cry, hear my call, hold my hand lest I fall. Take my hand,